IPA events cover a wide range of topics and really to promote excellence and professionalism in public administration. We also believe it's important to provide a safe platform to discuss failures in public administration or difficulties. Earlier this year I spoke at a NIPA event, my first and before I became president, which was called Learning from Failure. So I was drawing on lessons from the Shergold Review and looked at the learnings from the home insulation program, which was affected, well, my department was involved. And it's important that we discuss and learn from things that go wrong in order to improve the quality of public administration in this country. We're all aware that the 2016 census on the Tuesday the 9th of August, the census website went offline, and there was widespread media coverage of this event, and I think it was discussed pretty widely. Sorry David, it's 18 weeks today, or 4 months last Friday since that night, so you've had an interesting 18 weeks. There are a number of inquiries and reviews that have been established. One of the most prominent has been the review of the events surrounding the 2016 e-census, improving institutional cybersecurity culture and practices across the Australian Government. That review was undertaken by Alastair MacGibbon, who's busy scribbling down on his notes down here. It's the Special Advisor to the Prime Minister on cybersecurity. It's 2 months today. Lots of todays since the report was completed, and I'm pleased to welcome Alastair here as well, and also very pleased to welcome David Kalisch, the Australian Statistician and Head of the Australian Bureau of Statistics. So thank you both very much for making time today. So I'd like very much now to introduce David Kalisch. David's career has spanned the public and private sector. David W. Kalisch was appointed the 15th Australian Statistician on the 11th of December 2014, 2 years and 2 days to be precise. Is previously the Chief Executive Officer of the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare for 4 years. He's a Commissioner at the Productivity Commission, was a Deputy Secretary in the Department of Health, and he's undertaken other roles including at the OECD. So please join with me in warmly welcoming David to the podium.
Thanks, Gordon. I'd also like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people, the land on which we're meeting today, and also pay my respects to their elders past and present, and also to acknowledge other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are either with us today in person or seeing this on video. I can also thank IPA for taking the initiative to schedule a session around the 2016 census and cyber security. As you might understand, the recent census experience is still pretty raw. So today you have the advantage of getting a very contemporary perspective that draws upon real battle scars as well as our innovations and successes. As I've said at a recent Senate estimates hearing and also the Senate inquiry that was set up into the 2016 census, the ABS stuffed up some things, it's a technical term for us, in the conduct of the 2016 census. The ABS should have done better. We understand this reflected not only on the ABS, but also on the reputation of government and the public sector more generally. We may have made your job more difficult, but I hope also that you can learn and benefit from our mistakes. The key learnings that I'm going to talk about today relate to implementing a major change program, providing a public service, responding to a disruptive environment, managing risk, privacy, and managing staff through such an event. In terms of designing and managing a major change program, the census is a major exercise. It's often being talked about as the largest peacetime exercise that Australia does regularly, with planning and implementation spanning at least 5 years. The 2016 census cost around $500 million, involved up to 38,000 field staff who were engaged for that temporary exercise, had complex delivery models for different populations such as Indigenous people, remote communities, homeless people, and the elderly. The ABS decision in 2011-12 to change from the traditional drop and collect paper form model to a digital-first census was a bold change, particularly for a cautious organisation such as the ABS. The ABS was changing the overall census approach to one where there was no Australian reference history or limited information on which to make judgments. The overall strategy and its ambition was not the problem, however. This new census approach needs to be continued. So what went wrong? The ABS underestimated the nature, complexity and risk of the change process. We applied behavioural economics, working with CSIRO, to develop our new census letter, and then used traditional methods of testing processes and estimating public behaviour, specifically conducting large annual field tests of up to a staggering 100,000 households. However, these tests proved to be unrepresentative of public behaviour through the census period. Further benchmarks of public behaviour in August 2014, when we're doing these large tests, or 2011 from the previous census, will not necessarily represent behaviour in 2016 and can never account for the actual event and the context surrounding it. This can lead to a significant underestimation of the number and timing of phone calls that would be received. And in the census, we received over 3.5 million phone call attempts. We also attempted to deliver the 2016 census independently as an organisation. While the conduct of the census is clearly the ABS's responsibility, we failed to recognise that our successes and failures reflect on all of government. With the size, scale and complexity of this project and the environment in which we operate, the ABS needs to be working in partnership with other agencies, central, service delivery and security in the design and delivery of the service. Plans for major events or programs need to include considerable preparedness around things that might go wrong. We should ensure that planning does not only seek to ensure a successful outcome, but also extend to potential strategies that can be used and more than likely modified in the event of a major failing or disaster. In terms of providing a public service, another learning from this year's census relates to the service delivery expectations of the public. The census seeks to be all-encompassing in its coverage of the community over a very short time period. This means that any call centre facility, mail service and e-census needs to be designed with an understanding of the consumer expectations and behaviours. Public-facing government agencies, such as as part of the public face of government, are expected to provide a good consumer experience. This does lead to the desirability of having an open dialogue with central agencies and government around funding envelopes that would provide different levels of consumer service and responsiveness. Our call centre clearly didn't cope with the volumes. There are two elements to this. Firstly, we had a level of acceptance around some calls being blocked. We also underestimated the enthusiasm of the Australian people to want their census form before census night, or the load on the call centre if something didn't go to plan. While the call centre and automated form request system were both scaled up, there are also limits. Many people were markedly inconvenienced by the unavailability of the e-census after 7:30 p.m. on census night, 9 August, and some tried multiple times to access the e-census system on the night with considerable frustration. However, 4.9 million households did complete the census online, 2.2 million before the outage and a further 2.7 million after it was restored. Those that used the e-census facility found it quick and easy way to provide their census information. In fact, the online form reduced the time taken by households by 70% compared to the paper form. Now, around the time of the e-census outage, the ABS did not do an adequate job to provide ministers and the government with sufficient information to allow them to help explain these aspects to the public. We were focused on trying to more fully understand what was happening and seeking to resolve it as soon as possible. We needed pre-prepared crisis communications plans and checklists. ABS accepts there was a communications deficit to the public and to the government. And in this instant communications world, now encompassing traditional media and social media, we needed to do much better. The ABS also needs to understand that we are seen by the public as part of government. The ABS can improve our public service at the same time as improving our key stakeholder relationships, but also in a manner that does not compromise the integrity of our official statistics. We've had this perspective at the ABS around independence of the organisation, but we can actually do both. This is a key focus of our current transformation and one that needs further attention following the census experience. Be alert to a disruptive changing environment is the third aspect. We cannot preset our planning and implementation. We need adaptive responses within such a major program over an extended period of time. We expected the public, media and politicians to respond like they had in the previous censuses, and they didn't. We obviously cannot jump at every shadow and respond to every alternative perspective. Not everything warrants a strong response, and our budgets do not stretch that far. But we do need to be sensitised to the potential slow burn of dimensions that might look innocuous at first, but then accelerate into a full-blown issue, and a bit like the Canberra bushfires. The ABS should have communicated more clearly at an early stage why retaining names and addresses was important. We clearly didn't persuade people about the security of their information. Part of this new disruptive environment recognises the changing nature of traditional media. There is little you can do to stop the media and social media reporting claims, even blatantly false ones. ABS staff, including myself, did 380 media interviews in the weeks leading up to the census. This may have contributed to the strong level of public participation in the census, however, could not extinguish the fear and concern. I make these points not to blame the media, but to recognise that we have a different media environment than in the past, and simply point out it's a complex challenge which the ABS clearly failed to address effectively and which other agencies also need to consider. I'm also now more wary about the use of past experience as a guide to future performance, and would provide this advice to anyone who is procuring a significant service from an external provider. IBM was seen as a low-risk option because they had successfully delivered the e-census facility in 2006 and 2011. However, in a world where the environment was changing significantly, such as we are now seeing with cybersecurity, past suppliers who had a previous approach may in fact turn out to be a high-risk choice. For example, the environment which the service which is being offered may have changed so significantly that reuse of essentially the same approach or strategy they had in place some years previously is not sufficient to deal with contemporary risks. So what about managing risk in a contemporary environment? Key lesson here, if you're going to take one lesson, this is it. You cannot outsource risk. IBM obviously failed to deliver the contracted service to the necessary standards, and they have provided financial recompense to cover the additional costs we in the government have had and will still incur as a result of this incident. But the reputation of the ABS also took a big hit because ultimately we are responsible for a good census process as well as delivering quality census data. There are two dimensions related to risk management that are pertinent here: accurate assessment of risk appetite and active management of key risks. For public-facing agencies and agencies delivering critical services, such as the ABS, we need to operate with a low risk appetite. There is little public or government tolerance for error of any kind. I recognise the impact of this risk was also not just on the ABS, but on the broader public administration and government. We had a misplaced sense of confidence, indeed complacency, about the e-census and its security. We worried about the element that we knew would change, the increase in the number of users. We didn't adequately test and review the things that we thought would not change, particularly the DDoS security. A more thorough, independent review of the DDoS defences would have identified a key weakness in the architecture, a reliance on a single layer of protection called Island Australia. More independent assurance was needed, but we also needed to foster a culture that sees risk management as an integral and valuable component of our approach, and this is a key part of the ABS transformation. In terms of privacy and data use, Australian censuses have a long history of debates about privacy, and some of the younger people in the room probably might not remember this. But the use of, around the use of census data, so 1971, 1976, 1996 and 2006 censuses are all prime examples where privacy was a hot button issue around the census. Now, we need to collect names in the census for sound statistical reasons. This is international best practice for census taking, and despite what you might have heard, Australia has actually been doing it for over 100 years. The decision by the ABS to retain names and addresses for up to 4 years, rather than the previous 18 months, was to meet the needs of public administration and the community to produce more valuable statistics for policy and or evaluation purposes. This would enable us to further improve the quality of some of our statistics, as well as produce new statistics around issues such as industry restructuring, changes in local communities, and changing family structures. The ABS has accepted that the privacy impact assessment undertaken by us was deficient in a number of ways. The lack of independent, external or rigorous enough assessments provided a platform for negative and critical views to project from, regardless of the reality or the facts. One further insight from the recent census experience for me was that many of those who saw the value of greater use of public data did not give voice to their desire for greater use of public data. Some did, but many did not. The challenge is to help encourage and mobilise those who see value in better use of our public data resource so that they can be vocal advocates for the use of public data assets and provide greater balance to the more vocal privacy advocates. The other key learning from the recent census is that the general population probably has a different view about privacy and the privacy of their personal information compared to the fears of some privacy advocates. As part of our communication campaign, we were monitoring community sentiment toward the census through the census lead-up, and this remained strong, with about 97% of the population intending to complete the census, and this was consistent right through the privacy debate. Last lesson is around managing your people. So ABS staff have considerable pride in what we do and what we achieve. There is a shared purpose to deliver quality, timely, relevant statistics. Those working on the 2016 census and across the entire organisation were hurt professionally and personally by this experience. After the initial shock of what happened, the organisation did come together spectacularly to ensure that we could still deliver a quality census outcome in 2016. The key dimensions of the 2016 census design were critical to achieving a good census outcome, but so were the efforts of our managers and staff to achieve this outcome. Senior managers ensured we were available and visible, walking the floors in subsequent days and weeks, supporting people, ensuring good decisions were taken in a timely fashion, and trying to ensure staff received rest breaks. Employee assistance arrangements already available were amplified, and staff encouraged to make use of these. People from across the organisation not working on the census helped out with census-related activities, at the same time as we kept to our original schedule of still releasing other essential statistics in the economic, population, social and environmental fields. We certainly received some vile emails, letters and phone calls that no one should ever receive. We also received many kind wishes of support from across the public sector, from key users of ABS data, as well as family and friends. At times like these, personal and professional networks really matter. And for those of you who reached out, thank you. There's already been an upside for the ABS. Professionally, a number of ABS staff have learnt much from this census that will help the organisation plan, implement and manage our critical processes better in the future. I've already seen some improvement in our culture change toward greater internal collaboration and the greater recognition of the need for us as a mid-sized organisation to access external expertise and perspective. Now, some of you may be aware of the major and ambitious transformation underway at the ABS since mid-2015. A number of lessons from the 2016 census experience will reshape our transformation program, and this is canvassed in greater detail of the longer version of the speech that will be available on the ABS website shortly. I'm taking my 20 minutes quite literally. But I do want to end with a bit of a postscript on the latest information on the 2016 census. Our preliminary estimate is that over 96% of households in occupied dwellings completed the census, a figure that's comparable with previous censuses and better than a number of our international colleagues. We also collect information from persons outside of their usual residence, from hotels, maritime vessels, airports, national parks, grey nomads, the list goes on. So the actual proportion of the population contributing to the census is quite a bit higher. And over 80% more households participated online in 2016 than 2011. And while we didn't achieve our target of a 100% increase over the 5 years, this increase of 2.2 million more online forms and smart innovation in our online form should contribute to more accurate data. The first census data will be available on 11 April 2017. 2.5 months earlier than was the case in the 2011 census. Further data releases will be in June and October 2017, and we're going to release a further instalment of the Australian Census longitudinal data set, adding a 5% sample from the 2016 census to the 2006 and 2011 samples, and that will be available in December 17. And finally, we look forward to working with many of you to unleash the power of the 2016 census data, providing benefits to the Australian community that have supplied us with their information. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. I might just pass on quickly now to Alastair so we can continue the conversation. So I'll introduce Alastair. Alastair MacGibbon became the first Special Advisor to the Prime Minister on cyber security in May 2016. And in this role, he provides leadership and advocacy on cyber security policy and the government's cyber security strategy. Alastair was Australia's first Children's E-Safety Commissioner, and before that he worked for 15 years with the Federal Police, including as founding director of the Australian High-Tech Crime Centre. He has private sector experience before his time with the APS, including with eBay and the University of Canberra. So please join me in warmly welcoming Alastair to the podium.
Well, thank you very much. May I also extend my acknowledgement to the traditional owners of the land, the Ngunnawal people, their elders past and present, to all Aboriginal people here today or watching this online. Thank you very much, Gordon. Thank you also to IPA for having me. David, can I acknowledge you and say that that speech and the types of things that you spoke about, the acknowledgements that we put in our report is really heartening, and you were always a good person to deal with on this from August the 10th onwards. And in all seriousness, David was, and he was always extraordinarily professional. And I know that some would think that the role that I had to take from August the 10th on was an adversarial one with the ABS. It certainly wasn't. I had a job to do. I certainly wanted to make sure we executed upon that with a degree of efficiency, but also hopefully with respect towards both David, his senior management, and the ABS more broadly. And can I say that there, but for the grace of God, go many of us in any project we've ever run. And I always took that attitude. There is no such thing as a risk-free environment. There is absolutely no such thing as a risk-free environment. And we need to make sure that we do develop a culture of accepting risk, even though, as David quite rightly said, we can be extraordinarily unforgiving when some of those risks are realised. Martin Parkinson, my boss, spoke here earlier this month, and he spoke about issues of innovation and risk. And so I thought I would continue the theme that Martin spoke about, perhaps with less well-prepared notes, Gordon. I was lucky that I was writing them as David was speaking, because he did speak about many of the issues that I could talk about in my 20 minutes. So I can talk about some others now. So again, David, thanks so much for putting me on the spot. I would have been harsher in my report had I known that you would take away this thing. Now, let me say this firstly. In many respects, in the public service, we are architecting for yesterday's problem tomorrow when it comes to our IT. We are using old methodologies and old thinking. We're using old risk models and old risk thinking to architect our IT solutions. We are creating legacy systems every day. And the statement I would make to you is that our very risk aversion is what is going to be increasing our risk environment further down the track. And we have to change the way we do that. We have to change the way we architect our IT. So that's a point I'm happy to expand upon when it comes time to question, because I know it might sound counterintuitive. What I'll say to you is that in Canberra we have an absolute obsession with compliance. We have an obsession with compliance, and we hold on to it as our way of helping drive down risk. And we hold on to that compliance and we say, if we have complied, if we have ticked the box, if we have done the things that are compelled upon us, then we have reduced our risk. And I'll say, in the case of the ABS that had perfectly developed paperwork in relation to these things, that the risk was not mitigated. Because risk is not something that just lives on paper. It is not something that compliance can necessarily reduce. I have always seen compliance, particularly when it comes to cybersecurity, as a hygiene issue. There are good things to do. There are good things we must do that will reduce certain vectors of attack and certain risks, but they will not reduce all of them, and it requires us to be extraordinarily alive to how we can test and learn. So I'm challenging our compliance culture and saying to you that if that's what you rely upon for your IT security, for your cyber security, for the services you deliver to the public, then we will invariably fail. And the ABS events on the 9th of August and then following from there will not be the last time, clearly, that we have a large small IT security failure. It's not my intention today to go into what actually happened on the night. David did a remarkable job, I think, of outlining the issues that led to it. But let me say there were indeed on the day 4 denial of service attacks on the 9th of August. They should have been mitigated. They should have not had the impact they had. There shouldn't have been a failure in routers because they were poorly programmed. There should have been an ability to interpret outbound traffic as not malicious. And therefore, the ABS shouldn't have had to take the very, very brave decision, and I'll say that to several people in the room whose faces I can see, the extraordinarily brave and I think right decision to actually turn the site off on the night. Shouldn't have had to, but the fact that the decision was made, I think, showed a level of maturity and hard-headed decision-making that we should respect. But what about risk? Well, when it comes to cybersecurity, I'm going to say to you that we have sheeted an awful lot of risk home to CEOs. And I'm going to make a statement that says that I don't think many of those CEOs of organisations know exactly what type of risk they are now wearing. And that's one of the first observations I would make that came out of the census for me. And that is that the level of knowledge across the public sector, particularly amongst senior executives when it comes to cyber risk, and even the dialogue that we have about cyber is not well enough developed. You cannot make decisions on something you do not understand. You can't outsource risk, and nor can you delegate it down to people. Ultimately, as the head of an agency, you will be the one that owns that risk. And so one of the key recommendations in our report is quite a simple one: to improve the level of cyber education amongst senior executives in government, just as the private sector are, by the way. And any board you meet today of a viable listed Australian company will say that cyber risk is their number one existential threat. And they are increasingly educating themselves, and senior public servants in Australia need to understand that as well. The next one is the concept of lexicon. On the 10th of August, The video will be replayed for many years on 101 crisis management, not what to do, in terms of a press conference, where we had a minister saying that it was neither a hack nor an attack. You had me saying it was not a hack, but it was an attack. And we had David saying that data was safe. Now, then, by the way, the intelligence agencies would say, no, it wasn't an attack. Let me explain all of this to you. The minister was right, I was right, David was right, and the intelligence agencies were right, yet all four of us would say different things. Why is that the case? Because each of us have a different interpretation of the same words. There definitely was no hack. Everyone was right. There was no data exfiltration. There was no compromise of Australians' information. But there was an attack, a small a attack, I would say, to keep my intelligence and defence friends happy, because there was a malicious person or people that were attacking the ABS website. They were doing harm, and their intention was, through what is commonly known as a distributed denial of service attack, because you just have to Google it to see, was to attack the government and to prove that they were smarter than us, and they did a really good job on the day and possibly for a few days following. And were the intelligence agencies right? Well, absolutely. Because when I speak to my friends in defence and in intelligence agencies and I say the word attack, they say, what direction do we send the planes and ships in? Because if someone is attacking Australia, well, that's a totally different matter. And the Australian Cyber Security Centre will say Australia has never suffered a cyber attack. They will still say that today, and they are right, because we have never seen what is defined by the defence and intelligence community as a cyber attack, even though we suffered several on the 9th of August and many since, sadly. So we have a lexicon problem, we have a dictionary problem, we have a language problem. Media doesn't help it. I'm not here to criticise the media, but I can tell you that you can explain till you are blue in the face in matters cyber that it was not a hack, and the first headline will say hack. You'll explain what a hack is, a compromise, exfiltration of data, blah, 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 changing data, and they will still call it a hack, because that's what we expect to hear as a public. So we've got to educate people, we've got to change the lexicon. The next thing, and the first recommendation in the report, because while I was going to throw stones, David, I wanted to make sure I threw them at myself first, our crisis coordination, our crisis management arrangements were insufficient. We had newly inked our cyber incident management arrangements, which was good that I knew they existed. Sadly, no one else did. Well, the few agencies that didn't use it because in their definition it didn't qualify as an attack. 12 hours and 19 minutes after the website was taken down, I received a call from the Crisis Coordination Centre. My ambition, of course, is to take that service level to 12 hours by 2017 and know that if I can keep shaving that off in the years I have in the public service, that at some stage we could achieve nirvana. So clearly, our own way of handling this matter failed. The way we communicated, the way we made our talking points, the way we engaged the media, the way we engaged the public, we failed. And we all know that in a crisis, and that's not David, that's us, that's me, that's my role, that's that of the government more broadly, we failed. We failed to win back the trust of the Australian people early on. And everyone knows that in a crisis, if you don't do that in the earlier stages, you have a big uphill battle. So my first recommendation was that we improve and change, frankly, our cyber incident management arrangements and possibly let people know they exist. And then we need to exercise. When I first started in this role, Gordon mentioned I used to head up the Australian High Tech Crime Centre. We used to do cyber exercises in 2002 and 2003. I can tell you that the Commonwealth Government does less of those now than we did back then. And how have we allowed ourselves to get to that situation? And that, of course, is changing. Now, I've already mentioned that we're architecting for yesterday's problem tomorrow. I should probably put a comma, maybe, and creating the next legacy system. So we need to change the way we invest in IT. Let me use the example of newspapers, a disrupted industry. And I worked at eBay at the time as we destroyed, sadly, the newspaper industry in Australia. What happened? Newspaper industry had diminishing revenues, increased costs, and lower circulation of their newspapers. How did they respond? They responded by making smaller newspapers, sweating cost out as best they could. Making those smaller newspapers made them less compelling to buy, which created the vicious cycle that saw what is the inevitable destruction or the eventual destruction of those as viable assets. How do we invest in IT today? Well, we've changed the finance rules. Gordon knows this. We've been in discussions on some other matters. These days, we're squeezed really hard. You need to offset money in order to get money. So you've got to squeeze other bits of your organisation. You invest in the cheapest possible way, the IT infrastructure, and you don't reinvest in it once it's built, and you wait until it gets to the edge of falling over again, and you go back to government and say, well, I need some more money. That's not the way to run IT systems in government. It's not the way that you would run them in the private sector. So what are the solutions? Solution is cloud. The solution is cloud. We have to move to cloud. We need to move to cloud fast. We need to have protected cloud, secret cloud, top secret clouds, and we need to be doing that now. Why cloud? Cloud because it's a consumptive model. Cloud because you can scale. Cloud because you can roll out better user experiences faster. Cloud because you can build security in and it can be managed by people that know security. Cloud because you can do some other amazing stuff in relation to analysis of what goes on inside those systems. And we must move to cloud faster. And we need to change the business model in relation to risk. We need to stop seeing risk and cyber security as something that we need that needs to be done versus cyber security to be an enabler of our business. So banks, when I first was involved in matters cyber in the very early 2000s, saw security as an overhead. They saw security as red ink. They saw security as an embuggerance they had to have. Those same banks today see cybersecurity as an enabler. They see it as an enabler because they can go into markets they couldn't go into before, they can do it faster, and they can do it better, delivering a better service to their customers, and roll those things out, as I say, almost instantaneously. So they have realised that good cybersecurity built into the architecture of the systems they use is a business enabler, not as something that we in the public service consistently see as just something we have to do in order to get our business done. Now, in the report, we talk a little bit about ASD, the Australian Signals Directorate, a remarkable organisation, well loved in government, and rightly so, and the Australian public should know that they are well served by what is a remarkable agency. But it was clear to me that we need to amplify the ability for ASD to assist agencies. I don't think David and the ABS would be alone in saying they wish they could get more from ASD. And yet ASD is not staffed appropriately to do that, and we need to amplify their message. So in the report we talk about getting the Digital Transformation Agency to do more in relation to security, to bake security into products that become whole of government products that we can roll out across the APS, taking the learnings and messages of ASD that will still clearly be heavily involved in certain parts of government, but unable to scale across all of the Commonwealth and the states and territories and local government too, which is an important part of their role. Oh, is that your computer talking? Now, something else that I think is really critical, and it surprised me, is there's a guy called Mike Burgess, used to be at ASD, then he went to Telstra as their CISO and he's just left. But Mike published a really interesting piece that's worth looking at. Just Google the 5 no's of cybersecurity, KNOWS. And one of his 5 no's is know the value of your data. Know the value of your data to you as a business, know the value of your data to your customers, and most importantly, know the value of your data to those who will do you harm. Because if you understand the value of those things to those different groups, you know how better to protect it, you know the likely ways that people will take it from you. I'm going to add something to Mike, I'm sure he'd appreciate it, I know Mike well, is know the value of your services. If you had asked me on the 8th of August, or indeed on the morning of the 9th of August, David, whether your service was an essential service for the Australian people, I wouldn't have even thought about it. If you had called me, I would have said, good luck, I'll be filling out my census tonight. I was sick, lying on the lounge, and I wasn't able to log on the night, sadly. Then I got the phone call saying the site was down. But know the value of your service. Do we know the value of the services we provide to the Australian public? Not just the data. I think government does that pretty well, in spite of what the public would say. I think the ABS in particular knows the value of data. It knows how to protect it. It knows those. In fact, in some respects, it was bound by that view. But knowing the value of the service we provide, even if it's a pop-up service like the Census, is critical. And frankly, it got me asking questions of what else do we provide? What would happen if the tax office was offline yesterday, right? What happens if tax was offline? What happens if DHS was offline or health? Worse, what happens in states and territories if health systems are offline, transport systems and other such things? We need to understand the value of the service we provide. Some of them aren't critical infrastructure, but they're still highly valuable to us, highly valuable to the public, and importantly, risky to us if we fail. So we need to change this concept of digital service delivery. David's already mentioned that the public themselves have changed their view. The public have changed what they expect. Frankly, the public expects the same experience in dealing with government as they do from a large bank or from dealing with Google or Microsoft or other internet companies. And yet we're restricted in the way we think as government. And so we have all of the obligations of government, all of the obligations in terms of risk and compliance, and at the same time a public that expects us to be dealing with them in the same way as they encounter in the private sector. And the tensions that David encountered on the 9th of August he won't be alone. The services that we collectively deliver to the public will be under extraordinary strain. And we need to change the way we deliver those services to the public. And we do need to therefore be agile. We do therefore need to take risks. We therefore have to be in the cloud so we can roll these things out. But David also mentioned the concept of how we engage the public. The ABS took enormous pride and frankly enormous discipline in relation to how it polled the public. It did an awful lot of surveys. You did a lot of user sentiment surveys. You went out to the public pre the census. You would monitor what the likelihood was of people filling in the census. You looked at what people were concerned about. And that's what they were saying in the public polling. But online and social media, there was a different vibe, if I could use a technical term, being so close to the High Court. Thanks, you got my pop culture reference. I appreciate that. I think it's the last joke I'll say, but I'm not sure. So there was a vibe that was happening in social media that frankly wasn't addressed. And social media is a dangerous place for government to be. It's very personal, it's very direct, it's very real time, and it has to be extremely genuine. It cannot be confected. And that's tough. And it's risky. But we saw the risk that happens if we don't address those concerns, if we don't take them head on, if we don't start putting truths into the public where, as David said, people can tell outright lies. They can perpetuate those lies. And we need to confront them as government. We've got good truths to tell, but we need to be telling it in a way that allows us to engage them where they are doing their thinking. And unfortunately, it only needs to be a handful of people in social media to develop an amazingly powerful tool against government. It only took one disgruntled person, possibly, to do what happened to us on the night. So you can never avoid that. But the groundswell of the public, the expectation of the public and the thinking of the public about the viability of the census does not match the reality. And that's the groundwork that needs to be done. Now, the other thing that David quite rightly points out is you cannot outsource risk. I'll go one step further and say the biggest threats we have aren't necessarily outside malicious people. They are indeed problematic for us, nation states, criminal groups, politically motivated people. Insider threats are a problem for us. But our bigger problem is that this internet thing is an ecosystem by its very nature. So third parties become vital to us. Quite viscerally, in the case of the ABS, the inability of IBM to deliver on their contract. They've said that they weren't able to deliver on their contract, and they clearly did not deliver on their contract. And that concept of third-party risk, possibly third-party to a third-party risk, whether it was people that were working for IBM also as third parties, is neither here or there to us as the customer, as the Commonwealth. But third parties in the ecosystem mean that we can't just protect ourselves. And this leads me to possibly the hardest point for us to understand today. And that is that our attitude towards cybersecurity all along has been how we protect ourselves, how we put a wall up and a moat out there, how we stop threats from coming into our own environment. But that matters not if third parties that are supplying to us are at risk. It matters not if the third party to the third party is at risk, because we rely upon their services. And so we need to fundamentally, as Australians, change our attitude to this cybersecurity thing and stop playing what is a losing game. the game where we just think that we can only survive by putting up tall walls and having armoured convoys of encryption between those encampments. We need to secure the environment and the ecosystem. And that's not guards, guns and gates. That's actually changing our attitude on how we view our behaviour online and how we convey that to the Australian public, how we architect our IT and how we see cyber as an enabler. So, a cybersecurity strategy was launched by the Prime Minister in April. Quite a significant strategy, funded strategy, rare in this modern world. And an ambitious strategy, 33 initiatives that are quite stretchy going over 4 years. And I'll say this to you. If I'm still delivering on that strategy in 4 years' time, I have failed you and I've failed this government and I've failed the Australian people. The cybersecurity strategy that was launched is, in my view, the start. It's a way for us to start bending a curve that needs to bend an awful lot more and an awful lot faster than we can deliver with our strategy. The strategy itself is a sound one. It's good. It's amongst the world's best, and we should be proud of that. But it won't be sufficient. We won't be able to innovate or move faster or move into new businesses or protect you or protect our families if all we do is execute upon that strategy. Today we have 5 billion connected devices. In 4 years' time, we have, I'm told to end, which is lucky because this is my last sentence, I think, second last, is this. In 4 years' time, by 2020, can anyone guess how many devices we'll have? This is the interactive bit. 10 billion? Anyone else? 100 billion? Okay, well, GE says 55 billion devices, 11 times as many devices in the next 4 years. How are we going with the 5 billion that we've got? And ask yourself, are we architecting ourselves for the future or for yesterday's problem? So we need to change what we do. The census was merely a small bump in the road for what we will be encountering, and we have to change the way we view these things. I can tell you that in the short time I've been in this role, the political discourse has changed, not just because of the census, but a whole range of other times where we could have and should have done better as a Commonwealth, and there'll be many more of those instances as time goes by. But for the first time in the 15 years that I've been in this space, I can tell you there is very, very strong political engagement. And that political engagement goes beyond Canberra, it goes to the states and territories, it goes to every single company that I speak to, and frankly to every citizen I engage with. We need to seize that opportunity. We need to take advantage of what happened on the 9th of August to make this a stronger Commonwealth and a stronger nation. So thanks for the opportunity given to me by IPA today, and David, thank you again for your fine words. So thank you.
So I'll open it up now to questions, but I might just start with so today's conversation has focused a lot around cyber, around IT and technology and the internet, but probably the lessons learned, and I'm sorry that we've got to learn lessons, but the lessons that, for example, my department has taken more generally would be around the nature of risk or contract management and not just accepting what contractors are saying, and how do you then work out ways to systems to look at that. Planning for the worst event. So I think generally we don't do that, but we've got a number of things in the portfolio where we would now be more explicitly planning for the worst. And also when we go through some changes, we're setting up buddy systems. So if we're doing something in an area, we'll look for a buddy across the public service, typically within the public sector, but maybe outside, to provide some guidance or assessment or peer it. But can I ask you then, just so some of the lessons learned, I know you talked about the primary risk because you can't outsource risk, but other broader risks that come from this, including workplace?
Perhaps I'll talk in, I suppose, the context of the ABS transformation, because there's actually sort of 6 areas where we're looking to change the organisation and just trying to draw the census learnings into that framework. So the framework talks about 6 areas: environment, strategy, governance, people, culture and infrastructure. So in terms of environment, it was around understanding that disruptive nature of the environment that we were going into, In terms of strategy, it's making sure that the organisation has a focused strategy. I mean, we can get sort of distracted on a whole range of other things, but prioritisation around where you put your resources, around where you put your effort is quite clear. The governance dimension is something that's critical for us in terms of making sure you have the structures that actually deal with the real risks. You have a good risk management approach and maturity within the organisation, and that's something that we need to build at the ABS. The fourth thing is around people, so making sure you've got the right people capability. If you don't have it in-house, get access to it. The fifth one is around culture, so I mentioned the independence of the ABS. That's something where we're getting a more contemporary understanding of the role of and as to how we work. Plus, the ABS is a technical specialist organisation. People like doing things from start to finish. They're not natural collaborators, either internally or externally. So that's part of the culture change. And then around the infrastructure, we have got some systems in the place that are about 40 years old. Sort of a past statistician has talked about fragile ageing systems. So that's one of the challenges that while we're also doing the census, we're also doing the transformation. We're rebuilding our statistical business systems over 5 years. We're about 18 months into that process. So we're also managing a really big change process that has gateway reviews, has external people on the board from the Commonwealth Bank. So we've got the CIO of the Commonwealth Bank on our external board, providing us with advice, as well as David Borthwick, a previous departmental secretary. So it's getting some of that external voice and external expertise. So that's just a little bit of a snippet. And if you go to the longer version of the report, of the speech from today that I did, I actually mentioned some of those things.
Thank you. It's Pamela Kinnear. Alastair, in particular, for you, said a couple of things in your speech, most of which I agree with. One, I'd just like to test you on a little further.
Don't push too hard.
You said at one level the public expects the same from its government services as it does from its private services. And I wonder if that's true. I wonder if they have higher expectations. I wonder if they worry more when government doesn't get it right. They expect government to get it right more often. And I expect they are more ready to blame when things go wrong. I mean, I think plenty of people pointed out that the same people who were criticising the census were the same people that put pictures of their children on Facebook. So I wonder, I'd be interested in your views on that. The second is, and both David and yourself said the same thing, I think in different ways, that to some extent the gap between the view of most people and the view of the vocal minority is something we need to pay attention to. And it seemed to be that your solution to that was, if you pardon my characterisation of it, add expertise and stir. And I think that in this sort of world, the zeitgeist we're in at the moment, truth-telling to post-truth narratives isn't working so well. I'd be interested in your views.
Sure. Well, firstly, on the issue of expectations, the comment I was making is that they expect a seamless engagement online, a good user experience. But I do agree with your observation that there's a higher expectation that people put on government in terms of what they're to do or not do with your data. In fact, I'll go one step further and say that I think there's an increasing degree of jaundice amongst the public in giving us data. Those same people, as you very rightly say, will give it away on social media where their data is the actual commodity. And that's how those free services make their money. But if you said that to a person, if I said, David, but you uploaded all on your social media site, he goes, well, I choose to do that. You're compelling me to fill out this census thing, and I don't want to do it. In fact, I can be fined for not doing it. How dare you? And we don't trust the government with our data anyway. We trust these big companies that have no laws governing them and no oversight, no Senate committees that are always fun to appear before, or other such things. So yeah, there is a huge disconnect. There is a distrust. And what I'd say to those, we've got to walk into that distrust. And we actually need to say, you know what? We'll be held to account for it, absolutely. Show us how we're misusing your data. Show us where we're not actually, where our staff are misusing your information, because that's a shock to us, because we don't allow it. And that goes to my post-truth answer. I was actively involved in the data retention debate. in favour of it. That's not a popular place to have been. That was pre me coming back to government. But I went into that debate knowing that there was this extraordinarily vocal, sometimes very verbally violent group of people who were saying that this whole data retention thing is an awful thing, this whole metadata thing is awful, how dare the government do it? Yet I saw the benefits. And by directly speaking to people online, you can actually get truths through. You just can't get it in the normal way. You have to actually get down and engage them in not in dirty conversation, not in ugly conversation, but certainly get down to their level and say, well, I'm going to call you on it, you're wrong. Prove to me why I'm wrong. And engage them. You can't win all those people, but we can't allow these groups of people to tell untruths. We can't shy away from that in government. We've got to engage it. It's not a fun place to be, but until we do that, these untruths will just perpetuate, and online is the great place. Because online I can just choose the information that fulfills my worldview, and I can exclude all other information. And my data feed, in fact, just tells me more and more people that agree with me. So it becomes a self-fulfilling thing for them. That's why we have to directly address that. Not an easy one. I'm not sure if I've even answered your question, but absolutely, you've got to go in there and have a debate. And they're not easy. I also did the Apple v FBI one. That's another fun one, right? Because there are a lot of Apple fanboys and girls out there that say there's no way the FBI should go in and get that information, break that phone open. And I say, absolutely. Search warrants are executed all the time on people's houses. That's pretty privacy infringing. I've done it myself. How much more infringing is breaking into a phone? But the debate online is just not rational, and we've got to engage in that space. And frankly, we've got to do it hard. And we can win, but not if we don't play.
I'll just add a little bit to that. So certainly my perspective is similar to Alastair's, that I think there is a higher level of standard imposed upon government and expected on government by the public. But hey folks, that's the reality. Just get used to it. The second dimension is probably just two different perspectives on, I suppose, engaging with some of the falsities around the media and social media. We probably successfully in the end dealt with one of the claims, and it was particularly a claim from a previous Australian statistician, which always doesn't help. Past person in the job, out of the job for 16 years, goes into the public, makes some inaccurate statements. But we actually were able to demonstrate after some time that those statements were inaccurate. But I suppose the key to that was that it did take us a bit long to actually get to that point. And by that stage, his comments had been used by privacy advocates, by politicians, as a justification for some of their perspectives. In terms of the broader privacy advocate group, who are talking about the ABS engaging in surveillance of the Australian population, I mean, that's just cloud cuckoo land stuff. You're never going to deal with that, and we just, irrespective of what we said, that was going to be their view, and we couldn't combat it.
Hi, Russ Knudsen from Immigration Border Protection. Thank you, David, first for your transparency and honesty, and Alastair for your very frank and fresh overview of the status quo, I believe. Just like to ask about a couple of concepts you mentioned, Alastair. The tension between compliance and risk, the obsession in Canberra with IRAP, ISM, and even in industry with 27,000. Adding to that, the comments you made about trusting third parties, or rather being wary of the risks introduced by third parties. But then your comments about cloud being the solution. I think a lot of the benefits you mentioned are really potential benefits, and I'm not sure they're here today. I'd like to know what you think needs to change before government agencies actually have a basis on which to trust cloud providers.
Ross, right?
Russ.
So thanks, Russ. I can't remember your first question. I'm sorry. That's bad of me. I was listening. Compliance.
So the point of the question is on what basis?
Compliance versus risk.
On what basis? Can we trust cloud providers?
Okay. Right. Okay. So let's talk about compliance first. Compliance is hygiene. Okay. That's how we need to view compliance. We have to comply. There's rules that say we comply. That's good. We should view it as hygiene, not as risk, and as certain risk mitigation. But by being totally hygienic, we don't remove all of our risk. It's still an active thing. So we clearly have to comply. There are rules. I would argue that we need to look at some of those rules and try to be a bit more, in a sense, risk tolerant, which is going to start coming to the cloud answer to you, hopefully. But we can't conflate compliance with just total risk mitigation. It's hygiene and it goes some way towards it, but it's not all risk mitigation. The question with the cloud is an interesting one. I'm not saying it's just, hey, let's turn on the cloud and everything's going to be fine. There are a couple of things there. One, I think we need to change some of our security thinking and accept certain risks. There are risks with everything we do. You know, you would have heard of the phrase box hugging, the concept that, you know, if I can see the servers and I can hug them, then the data's safe on them. Well, sadly, I've met lots of people that can prove that really wrong. And so whether I can hug the boxes down in the basement of my building or in a data centre that I own, or someone else just happens to have it somewhere in a cloud, doesn't necessarily make it any safer or less safe. There are certain ways in which the cloud is architected that makes it really difficult to meet the current compliance regimes. And I think therefore we need to change our thinking. There are ways we can mitigate some of those risks. There is cost associated with moving to the cloud. And as people would know who know the cloud, there's different ways in which you can use the cloud, just as, you know, for storage, you can use it as sort of an infrastructure, you can use it for compute, you can use it for, much higher level stuff. And there's different layers of cloud. And we need to step into it. But what I'm saying is, if we're building our architecture the way we've done it for the last 20 years and think that we should do that for the next 20, we've got a few problems. The first is we don't have the budgets for it anymore. There's just not the money. The politics has changed about the way in which we get that money, and the technologies we're deploying just age so much faster. So it just means we have to change. I'm not saying that the cloud is some silver bullet. I'm not a vendor selling it to you. What I am saying is we need to acknowledge that the cloud, by moving to the cloud, we remove some of the inherent risks associated with the way we currently have our boxes. We can do some really smart things with the cloud. There are other risks associated with it, whether we're big enough to have a bespoke cloud built for us, you know, a private cloud. So are states and territories. Or we go with public cloud. I don't know, I don't care really. That's for others to decide. But the answer is we can't have environment building its own stuff and DHS building its own stuff and tax building its own stuff or immigration and border protection, because ultimately we're just creating these legacy systems. We need to share better. So if you do build stuff, we need to be smarter at having others leverage it. And we don't do that well. I remember, David, when you were asked the question at a Secretary's Board, well, when did you come for help? And you said, when was help offered? And it was a really good retort. We operate as little islands. As the head of an agency, you're on your own. It's not a happy place for us. We need to start, when you spend money on IT, giving it free to the smaller agency next to you. Getting yourself a buddy, like Gordon was saying, so that you've got, that we just do this out of goodwill. We're all paid by the Commonwealth. We're all using Commonwealth dollars to roll this out, and yet we all own our own little slices of IT. And that's just a recipe for disaster. And the ABS won't be the last one. So, again, I'm not naive to think that the cloud is going to be an easy solve, but if we don't bite that bullet, along with a whole heap of other ones, we're never going to pull ourselves out of this, and it's only going to get worse.
Thank you. KL Drinkwater from the Department of Finance. Thank you, David and Alastair, for your honesty and also your integrity and sharing with us today the APS values and issues around that. My question's to David, and it's around, is there another business process, a different way of collecting a census, doing what you've done in a completely different way, while still obviously meeting your legislative requirements and the value of the data over time for the Australian government and the Australian people?
Subject question. Great. No, it's a really good question. Yes, there are other ways. There are many other ways. In fact, other countries are doing a range of things and testing a range of things. Probably the key dimension when you think about, I suppose, how we collect data and what data to collect is actually what's the purpose of the data. And in the Australian
case, the census is really important for a number of key things. One is to give us insights into small communities, so small regional communities, but also small populations, so that in most of our other survey information, we can get a sense of what's happening in the labour market, what's happening in industry, what's happening in sort of housing and other dimensions that we ask in the census. Probably through other mechanisms such as tax, we can get information on income. Through information that might be increasingly becoming available through the GPS locator that's on your phone, we can tell about journey to work and other things. So there are different ways in which that information seen is changing quite significantly. What the census also gives us is benchmarks on our population. So we do need to do a full population count. We think at least every 10 years, probably not every 5. The methodologists in my place, who are pretty smart, tell me we don't need to do it every 5 years, but we could do it every 10 and still get a baseline for our population that also then draws upon the information when you leave the country in terms of the outgoing and incoming passenger cards, that draws upon the Registrar of Births, Deaths and Marriages information, that also draws upon Medicare. So we're already using a range of different information sources. Probably other countries have set up population registers, so they've gone down probably the path that the privacy advocates would be fearing the most, of basically having a full population register, and then using that to link off other administrative data. I think eventually we will probably get towards that point of using administrative data much more, probably not based to a population register though in Australia. So Canada's started to use tax information. New Zealand is exploring the administrative data. Other countries like the UK are also, like Scandinavia, thinking about their administrative data. Most countries do a census every 10 years as well. So that's the other big change that differentiates Australia from other countries. But I'd have to say, in terms of the value we can get from the census data, in terms of the insights it gives us around the small communities and small populations, I think it is now worthwhile us doing a census every 5 years. I didn't think that a couple of years ago, but actually seeing the value that we can get from the census data linked with other administrative data, providing insights into some of the policy questions that you guys have, as well as the potential to better evaluate the programs that you have. That census data is now quite critical, and I think there are good ways in which we can probably enhance its efficiency while still delivering the outcomes.
Hi, thank you again for your candid comments, both to Alastair and David. Alastair mentioned about ASD having all this capability, but obviously not being staffed to achieve the greatest capability they could. And David mentioned about if you don't have the expertise, go get it, essentially. So from a cyber context, do you think that the APS and Alastair Defence broadening out is positioned well enough to attract and retain cyber professionals? And then as a second part, do you think that the APS and government is ready to be an incubator to drive innovative ICT security measures, given our compliance, low risk and fiscally constrained operating environment?
You want me to do that? Thanks. So I'm not being critical of ASD, by the way, nor am I actually critical of their staffing. I mean, they're a sizable organisation. They have other priorities, of course. Clearly, I think their motto is reveal their secrets, protect our own. So they've got a few other missions that we should be grateful that they do, and they do them extremely well, and they're amongst the world's best. And they're amongst the world's best in protecting us as well, and there are some amazing learnings that they have, and they promulgate those. I mean, the top 35 mitigations are celebrated worldwide, actually, as being some of the most insightful ways that you can reduce cyber threats. And the next iteration that will come out shortly, having seen it, is better still. So you don't always have to have staff to do things. You can take those staff and parlay it out to learnings and scale in lots of different ways. And what I'm advocating is that we scale differently. We amplify their messages in ways that we traditionally haven't. Intelligence agencies, would surprise you to know, I'm sure, aren't great necessarily on the publicity side. If I use the example of the ACSC threat report for 2016, which is a good report, by the way, worth a read, very open, gives a lot of information that governments traditionally don't give, learnings so that we can all benefit. It was funny, we helped do some talking points with the intelligence agencies on them as PM&C and said this is what we can do when the media come. They said that's fantastic, and it was released to the media, and then of course on the day I started getting phone calls. I said, well, it's not my report. I'll get someone to do it, and I phoned up our friends in the intelligence community. This is not talking at all any secrets, and they said, well, we don't do media. So why don't we do talking points with you yesterday or if you don't do media? So we end up doing the media. So what's my point? My point is that they've got great learnings. Our job is to extract those learnings and amplify them out across. And in this case, I think the DTA could be a fantastic example as it builds things and helps architect things. And as we move away from those legacy systems to newer systems, then we build that stuff in. So it's amplifying ASD. Is the Commonwealth able to recruit people? Yeah, it is. I think, again, it's a bit like my view towards the way we've seen cyber as this, it's a losing game and we've just got to try to hold the line versus saying, no, it's an enabler that if we get good at it, it helps us do business. The most exciting cyber work you can do, having done it in lots of different sides of the house, is in government. The best work. And we're just doing a poor job of articulating that to young people and, frankly, to people that are retreading themselves into new professions. So yeah, we can, but we shouldn't see it as binary. We shouldn't see it as you're either with government or you're against us. We should say to people that have been in government and they move out, hey, you're alumni. We trust you, we know you. We've just got to work out a better way to keep their security clearances, to keep them involved, to learn from them, to grow our network. Because, just like I said with third parties, we can't just be a pillar of light, even if, we're compliance-based on those other things, and everything else around is darkness. We need to work collaboratively with the private sector, so we should celebrate as people move to and from those things and not see it, as I keep saying, as fighting ageing and gravity, two things you can't do, and the other thing you can't do is fight the private sector in terms of what they're going to pay people. So let's work out a way to leverage those people as they move out. Let's be smarter in our process of doing it. So I have great hope that we will extract and retain the right types of talent and that the cyber strategy will grow more skilled people because we need them. There's a deficit. But it's not going to be doing it the traditional way. The traditional way is a way of loss. And the last question you had is, can government be an exemplar for security? Yes, we can. Certainly the learnings from ASD are remarkable and the learnings from government can be too. But we can also learn from the private sector. And David was mentioning that on his external oversight board, they have the CIO from Combank. We're getting smarter at doing that. We're getting smarter at bringing in people from outside and saying, hey, look, you're providing a service to the public, we're providing a service to the public, we all care about the data, we care about the services. Let's learn from each other. The smarter we get at doing that, the more seamless this whole private-public thing will be. Because the public, while they hold us to a higher standard, and rightly so, as David said, we've just got to view this as a continuum of an online life for people, where it's not online and real life, where it's online as part of their real life and offline as part of their real life. So the better we get in working with the private sector, the smarter we're going to be.
Probably that was the just one very quick comment on that. Certainly the Combank experience as well is that they have difficulty recruiting the right people, and I think it's just right across the private sector. So I think Alastair's perspective around government and the private sector working together and having more engagement is a way to actually build the pool generally for everyone.
Thank you very much, David and Alastair, for your presentations and for an open conversation. The topic around cybersecurity, IT security, but more generally risk management in public administration and elsewhere are really important. I think it's lessons learned are hard, and I know that myself, but they are hard. But honesty is very important. Your integrity in dealing with that, you've shown that, and I think that's very important. And also then the substantive responses on how to grapple with and how to deal with those issues. Again, that's a great conversation to have. So thank you very much for making your time and for being open in that discussion. And thank you all also very much for your active engagement in that. So can you please join with me in thanking David and Alastair?